Well, good evening and welcome to the September meeting for SLO Nightwriters. I'm your Vice President, Mary Silverstein. Tonight, we're going to be honoring the winners of our Golden Quill writing contest. Judith Bernstein has been our contest director and has done a wonderful job of running the contest, organizing, getting our judges. She's just done a great job. And I will introduce her shortly. She's going to be doing some of the presentations tonight. It's no small thing to put yourself out there for competition and critique as a writer. And we thank all who entered, appreciate it. And we hope we'll make it even bigger next year. We want to thank Harvey Ardman for being the judge for our short story category. The first place winner for the short story category is Jana Marie Rose for the story Voyager. And the second place winner in the short story category is David Brandin for Death and the Lion.
So this story is called The Voyager, and the reason it's called this and that the main character's name is Penelope is that I was reimagining the hero's journey into the heroine's journey and taking the story of the Odyssey, where the woman stays home and the man travels and journeys, and switching it that the woman is actually the one who goes out and does the journey and does the Odyssey. So that's the premise of the Voyager, but it's set in a modern day. The Voyager. My name is Penelope. I am innocent. I dream. Frequently in my dreams, I am swimming. The ocean is vast, yet I know where I am going. There is a mountain. I am finding my way there. I can see its peak in the sunlight. I want there to be a helper, I tell my therapist. A helper who is a man. Like he comes with a motorboat and ushers me inside it. We get to land fast. We begin a new life. That's not what you want, Moore replies. Moore is 62 and wears gray socks that fall low around his ankles. Sometimes he crosses his legs and I see scraggly leg hair peeking out from under his slacks. No, I say. No, Moore says. You actually do want to do it by yourself. You've been working toward this all your life. Moore's loafers are worn, rugged on the edges, cheap. I am not pleased by these shoes. Should I listen to a man who would wear these shoes? I'm not sure I agree with him. Do you think it's better that I do it all by myself? I ask. Moore shrugs. It doesn't matter whether it's better. This is just the way it has to be. For you, for Penelope. Our timer goes off and Moore stands up. I reach into my wallet and give him his check, and I stand up and wave goodbye. I'll see you next week, I say to Moore, and he says, blessings, which is what he always says. I turn the knob and head into the foyer out of the door and get into my car. I will get to the mountain one day, I whisper. I can do it by myself. I drive back to my small studio apartment near the beach. My bed is a mattress on the floor with a box spring. A crate is my nightstand. A cat would brighten up my space, I think. A cat would inspire me to get creative. A cat would be my friend. I have very little compared to what I had. Still, I am grateful. I have coffee. I have a toaster, some cheese and bread and jam I can make whenever I am hungry. I have my soul. That is the most significant part. Meetings with more make me more awake, yet it is night. I get under the covers and read. The book is Swan's Way by Marcel Proust. It is antiquated. It doesn't hook me, though I know I am supposed to like it. My eyes begin to close. As I drift off, I hear a woman's voice speaking to me. You can get to the mountain tonight, Penelope. You don't need a man to get there or a boat. You just need yourself. And then I am swimming peacefully in the water. You may wonder who I am, how I arrived here. What I did was take off the mask of the happy wife, the happy mother, the mask that said I was content doing things for everyone else except myself. I took it off and I set it on the kitchen counter of my house. I wrote my husband a letter telling him I did not love him anymore, that I wanted a divorce. I said, I do love our children. They will be okay with you for a while. I need a break. I took my suitcase and some other things and drove my car across 4 states to California. I felt there was no other way for me to survive. I was right. For years, I fantasized about leaving the family. I conjured image upon image of me, putting 3 pairs of jeans in a suitcase, 4 sweaters, a tank top, 2 scarves. I knew exactly which pieces of clothing I'd select. I'd wear boots for the drive, ones that were good for all weather, and pack sandals for the warmer climate. I'd take a few pieces of jewelry wrapped in a cloth bag, like the heart-shaped locket my mother gave me when I was a young girl. I'd bring a fresh journal to write about my travels, socks, underwear. I imagined my children looking at me as I touched their faces, big chunky tears falling from their eyes. Mommy has to go away, I would say. It is not forever. On the day I did leave, I did it while the kids were at school. My husband was working. I will be back, I wrote in the letter. I just don't know when. Don't try to find me. I stood in the driveway and gazed at my house before I got into the car. My home was broken for a long time, but it was where I'd raised my babies and kissed them and laughed. It was where my bare feet touched the floor and theirs too. It is where I slept next to that husband, gazing up at the ceiling fan, worrying and worrying, wondering when my life was going to start, when I could be perfectly myself, whether I could even find that woman who was me. My blouses hung in the closet. The moon shone through the window, lighting up my hands. Would I be destroying them by leaving, I asked myself. Or was I the one who was being destroyed? My hands shook all the time, going through the motions of my day. My suffering was like living in a flame. There was always a dark fire beneath my skin. So poof, I made an opening. I left. At night, I am in my voyage. I close my eyes and breathe. My arms and feet kick gently. What does it take to rebuild a self, to make a self new? How many years? How much pain? Where is the lighthouse? Sometimes it is hard to see. The lighthouse is inside you, the dream woman's voice says to me. I look at my fingers underwater. I lift them to my face and wipe my cheeks. My face feels clean now. It is just me. I am here. There is no covering, no mask, no lie. The mountain calls. I listen. I want to learn her. My husband and I did have a few happy years before the kids. We were engaged, then married, then parents. Mason now is 13. Josie is 9. Look looking happy seemed to be the most important thing, not being happy. We took a lot of pictures. We smiled. I am not sure what happiness really is or what it means. I'm trying to find out. I think I know more now. We did all of the things a family of 4 was supposed to do. I cooked spaghetti and fish. I read my kids' books before bed. I encouraged them to play with toys instead of having so much screen time. I made sure they had a shower or a bath every night. I mopped the kitchen floor before company came. I did laundry on Sundays, sometimes 2 or 3 loads. I made the kids fold and put their clothes away. My husband was an angry man, entitled and rich. I never knew when the anger would take hold. We could be having a calm evening and he'd see something on the news, and soon he was pushing me out of his way as I washed the dishes. Or he'd growl. And there was the making love, him forcing himself on top of me, telling me what to say, how to feel. An actress in a show was what he expected of me, the show of our marriage. I performed my obligations. I moaned for him. He moved his large belly on top of me, and then he stopped when he came and rolled away. I had children instead of a career. That is why I stayed as long as I did. Marriage, I learned, is like a creek. That is what it felt like to me. So narrow. It was fine for a while, but then I desired the ocean. I desired the forest, the mountain. I wanted to wander for a while and sleep under large trees with no one hassling me. I only started to know something about desire when my children were 6 and 2. I don't feel like a person, I said to my husband. I feel like an us, not a me. I want to know who I am, separate from you. Does that make sense? He smirked. Then you shouldn't have gotten married. These are just the things married people do. I tell more about these conversations. He tries to seem non-judgmental about my leaving, but I know it bothers him that my kids are left alone with that man. My husband was angry at me, I say. He was not angry at them. He never hurt them. I do not think he would. I tell more that my husband wants the children's love, their devotion. He wants their respect. With me, he didn't care. I was property. This is why things went wrong. Moore nods his head as I speak. You are just trying to be yourself. He doesn't want the real you. Sometimes Moore crosses one leg over the other and bobs his foot, and I can see the looseness of his socks. Once Moore said to me, being yourself is the most natural and important thing for a person to do, but many people don't know how, and they don't take the risks to try and be themselves either. You've done that. The children will be grateful for you, eventually. I have held on to that message on many days. I send my children letters. I don't know if they open them. I cannot talk to them by phone because my husband will not let me. He is very mad, as I suspected. This is okay with me. I need space and time. I need freedom. I need to know who I am, where I am going, what I want. I hope my children will be able to forgive me. I have already started forgiving myself. Each night in my dreams, I paddle through the waves. It is as though the ocean lives inside me. The waves are my breath. The mountain lives inside me too. And the trees sway in the chambers of my heart. I watch everything move. I am one with the landscape. I touch my body sometimes under the covers. I put one hand to my bare skin under my shirt and my other hand to my abdomen. I tell myself, My body is mine. I can do with my body what I like. It is warm enough in this small beach town in California to open the windows. The breeze blows in the scent of gardenias from my neighbor's balcony. In the evenings, I hear the waves of the ocean. In the mornings, sometimes coyotes shriek while I drink my coffee. I don't know how much is enough time. I don't know how to return home, or if home is what I should call that place. There is so little I really know. I keep breathing. I touch my body at night. I begin to know what my body feels. I begin to know myself. I am me. This is mine. Empty and yet so very full. When the dusk comes at the end of each day, I put down my book and I go outside to watch the moon rise. I walk on the beach. I feel the cool air. I know more now about who I am. I know the truth of my life. I know how to breathe, to take up space. I am clean. As far as time and what other people need and what happens next, with those things, I am content not knowing. Thank you.
Gunfire robber as I ran toward the Ambassador East Hotel, not far from Chicago's Gold Coast. I ducked around the awning, protecting the entrance. Windshields shattered down the street as I flew through a revolving door as though it weren't there. The shooter vanished with no arrest. Pure luck, it seemed, but dark thoughts began to gnaw at me. Death then ruined my 30th birthday scuba trip to Maui. I dived to a depth of 100 feet onto the submerged floor of the dead Molokini volcano when a 3-pound weight slipped out of my dive jacket. My buoyancy exploded and I began an uncontrolled descent. Left unchecked, a fatal attack of the bends was likely. Fortunately, the dive master grabbed my ankle as I soared past his face mask. He pulled me back to the crater floor and held me in place while he retrieved and resecured the weight. The scare cut short the dive. I rose slowly, following a zigzag pattern toward the surface, with a pause at 15 feet for the mandatory 5-minute safety stop. During the ascent, I wondered how lucky I'd been. The rental car in France, the robbery in Chicago, and the dive weight incident. I didn't believe in coincidences. I remember James Bond saying, the first time it happens, it's an accident. The second time, a coincidence. And the third time, enemy action. The memory led to a panic attack that drove up my breathing rate. By the time I surfaced, I'd exhausted the air in my tank. Death may have masked its identity in seemingly unconnected mishaps, but I feared the attacks wouldn't stop. Death never lost in the long run. But could there be a way to temporarily, like for 60 years, to redirect Death's attention? Surely there were other targets, older and more deserving. I thought about other possible ways Death might attack me, and I decided to avoid unsealed food and beverages. One never knew what might be served in a public place. As I flew back to the mainland after a retired 24-hour stay at sea level to avoid a possible airborne lethal decompression event after a dive, I wondered if religious authorities could offer guidance. After all, weren't the prospects of afterlife in their domain? It seemed the most reasonable strategy to follow. So I planned a sequence of visits in the Bay Area. After landing in San Francisco, I first called the Jewish synagogue in Palo Alto for an appointment. A day later, the rabbi greeted me at the Reform Synagogue on Rastradero. He invited me into his office for coffee. My assistant tells me you fear death stalking you, said the rabbi. This is not an uncommon concern in my congregation. I asked for a sealed bottle of water. Can you help me, Rabbi? I described my 3 suspicious encounters with death. It's only luck that saved me. Now I fear death will try again. I see. So you think the Malach HaMovetz is especially interested in you, eh? Do you know why? Malachamovitz? I'm sorry, replied the rabbi. I thought you were Jewish. The Malachamovitz in Hebrew is Hebrew for the angel of death. Oh, well, I replied, there's nothing particular I've done to earn such attention. Still, death's interest feels personal, not random. But you mentioned the angel of death. Do you think smearing lamb's blood on my front door will protect me from the Malachamovitz? Didn't that work for the Jews in the Exodus? The rabbi coughed into his hand, poorly hiding a smile. I think that was a one-off event, you might say. Besides, he added, you have to be the firstborn in your family, are you? I admitted I had older brothers. The rabbi sipped his coffee and placed his cup down carefully. We believe death is the ultimate end. You might find some solace in counseling. I'm sorry that I can't help you, but I can recommend a therapist. Then he suggested it might also be prudent to avoid large crowds so as to minimize potential casualties, not just mine. I was sure he thought I was nuts, but I thanked him for his time and drove slowly to my home in Mountain View. Despite my accelerating fears, I surprised myself at how smoothly I drove, absent my usual road rage. And it paid off. Driving in an unfamiliar slow lane, I narrowly avoided a serious accident on the 101 near the San Antonio road exit. I wondered if that might have been another attempt on my life. Next day, I called the Catholic Church in San Jose. It took some time to convince the parish secretary that I didn't wish to confess my sins, but that my concern justified personal time with the priest or pastor. The secretary's tone of voice expressed utter skepticism in my problem, but she set a time for a brief visit, maybe to save my soul. I hung up feeling guilty as well as scared. Even so, the priest was cordial when I arrived. He offered decaffeinated mango Ceylon tea. I chose bottled water again. As we drank, the priest asked about my dilemma with death. I described all the attacks, including the freeway close shave, and explained my fear of all things, even tap water. I think I understand, but yours is an exceptional problem, said the priest. Have you ever been treated for, I hope you're not offended, paranoia? Is there a history of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder in your family? There it was again, another smear on my sanity. My first reactions were frustration, followed by anger, but I just shook my head. Well, it is true, he observed, that the church has an unusual relationship with death. We believe that death can be overcome, but I'm not sure we can guarantee help with your problem until death is imminent. As of now, extreme unction is not yet called for. I stifled my anger and asked the priest if he referred to the resurrection of Christ or of ordinary souls. He made the sign of the cross and declared, everlasting life in heaven is granted to all true believers. But Father, I said, I'm only 30. I'm not in the habit of sinning, but it's too soon for me to go to heaven. I don't need or want to be resurrected just yet. I doubt that I'd be at the head of the line anyway. I seek to escape death's attentions now. Perhaps you might ask your doctor for medication to relieve your anxiety. I think lithium might be best, and of course, prayer. Sorry, my son, the church cannot be of further assistance. I've received little help from these older religions other than holy prescriptions for psychiatric counseling. In disgust, I wondered why they hadn't recommended a prefrontal lobotomy or electroconvulsive therapy. But still desperate for assistance, I decided to try Islam. I visited a mosque on Dolores Street in San Francisco. I just presented myself at the entrance to maybe get a more spontaneous and less guarded reply to my inquiry. It was a quiet time in the mosque between the noon and afternoon calls to prayer. The imam welcomed me, advised me that audiences were limited to 30 minutes, but invited me into his private sanctuary. I drank Arrowhead bottled water as aromatic steam rose from his cup of Arabian Pekoe tea. I explained my fears based upon suspicious encounters with death. I met my wits and imam, is there any way to divert or distract attention from me? By good works, perhaps? The imam closed his eyes, seemingly to reflect deeply on my question. Then he nodded open-eyed and said, We have in Islam many proverbs. They are quite inspirational and some may prove relevant here. I recommend that you find a way to make death fear you. That would, I believe, redirect its interest elsewhere. I found the suggestion intriguing and was certainly original, especially considering the dearth of ideas from other faiths. But how did one scare death? It was almost tautological. How did one scare the scariest thing in the world? I asked the imam if he had a specific suggestion. He mentioned an obscure proverb, but it seemed complicated. Nevertheless, I took his idea to heart and began to scour the daily newspaper. Days later, the San Diego Times reported that an 8-year-old African lion, Thor, the eldest male in a small pride at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, had been shot. The carcass was discovered on the park's artificial savanna near a small water hole. Visitors often rated the lions their favorite stop on the park's monorail, and Thor the most popular animal in the park. The shooter hadn't been identified. On a positive note, the park veterinarian reported that one of Thor's kidneys had been harvested. The organ was air expressed to the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Gardens for a transplant into an ailing lion. When I read the article, I sensed the time was ripe to follow the imam's recommendation. I decided to act. Next day, the Times updated its story. The Zoo Safari Park's veterinary hospital had been vandalized and Thor's heart removed from his carcass. The murder had already alarmed wildlife protection organizations, which expressed distress over the poaching and butchering. They characterized the acts as ominous attacks on vulnerable and endangered species. Police speculated the shooting might be related to the theft. Several years passed with no encounters with death. Enjoying my escape from death's clutches, I was sitting in a Pete's coffee shop in San Jose, Santana Row, sipping a cup of Major Dickinson's coffee blend. The crumbs from a blueberry muffin were on a dish. It seemed timely to call the imam and give him a progress report. When he answered the call, I reported that his proverbial suggestion had worked and thanked him. I said, death is afraid of me because I have the heart of a lion. Thank you.
I have the privilege of awarding, since our certificates have come, first place in the short story to Jana Marie Rose. Second place to David. Next group of winners is poetry, and our poetry judge is Joan Gelfand, who was a relative newcomer to the Central Coast, but I am sure we will see a lot more of her, hopefully, at SLO Nightwriters in the future. Joan is published in many national and international literary journals, magazines, and on the web. Her website is joangelfand.com. Surprise. She is the author of 3 well-reviewed volumes of poetry, and her books are available after, and an award-winning chapbook of short fiction. Her debut novel, called Extreme, is set in a Silicon Valley startup published by Blue Light Press. Additionally, her book, You Can Be a Winning Writer, The 4 C's of Successful Authors, is an Amazon #1 bestseller, and I bet it contains advice we can all use. So Joan, if you would come up and introduce the 2 poetry readers and give them their awards.
Well, thank you, Judith, for inviting me to be a judge. One of the things that I talk about in my book, You Can Be a Winning Writer, is networking and how important it is to meet people. And Judith came to a talk that I gave at Cuesta College years ago and called me up and said, I hear you're living in Paso Robles part-time, and would you be the judge? So thank you to Judith. And of course, as you know, these contests are judged blindly. We don't know who the person is behind the work. And so I got here tonight and found that we have this lovely young writer. And are these the right? No. Oh, you have two names. Okay. Well, she'll got our high school senior will come up next, but first we have Sarah Newfeld-Green, whose poem Eclipse was chosen for first place. Should we read first and then their certificates?
I
Or?
think with the certificate first.
Well, congratulations. Yes, I'm excited for you.
You could lower it.
Thank you. Better? Thank you. That's fine. Just a little notice behind this poem. It's called Eclipse. On May the 15th this year, there was a total lunar eclipse, and we could see it in this country. And it was and that kind of strange reddish color. It was an early evening and the sun had just set, which it does when it's full moon, because the moon, the sun comes between, the earth comes between the sun and the moon, exactly all in line. And I was inspired to write this because of what's been going on in the world. Eclipse. You could see her in all her glory, the large circle in the sky, dim, masked on this night of fullness. Her face a cloud of mottled red-gray in the east, eclipsed like our lives these past 2 years, a covering, a kind of protection from horrors on earth. Though shielded from the sun's reflection, she looked like Ukraine's destruction. Earth's shadow showed us what we may become soon, barren and dead. We make our own bed as we continue to use weapons of war and Earth's resources. A wrong politician he endorses as the clock nears noon. Humans, plants, unable to breathe, are blind like the moon. This unnatural darkness covered her face for only 2 hours. But here on Earth, we trample among the million dead. Wildfires burn, a shower of bullets to add to the dread. And 2 years later, we still have not learned true use of power. This earth is our bread. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was lovely. Kind of want you to read it again, but maybe you can share it with people online, or will the poems be,
All the winners will be on the website.
on the website?
Yes, we
Okay,
wanted
good.
the event first, and then they'll be available to tell their friends, and everyone will be able to read all of them.
Good. Okay. And
This meeting is also recorded on YouTube.
so this meeting will be able to be viewed on YouTube. And our second place winner, as I said, it was blind, so I had no idea that it was a high school senior. Her name tag says Emily, but her certificate says Christine, so she's a woman with 2 names. And her poem Veneer, and here's your certificate and a check, and congratulations.
Veneer.
Let's let these flames swelter higher, so we can hide under veneer of fire. Let's dance to the rhapsody of our broken hearts and disassemble our moving parts. Our marrow, hands, and minds, they've shaped this world, and now we're running out of time. I've listened to my scars sing in the darkness of my room while raindrops pounded sonatas on my roof. I've watched us roll over continents, laughing at everything that melts or burns, shivering as we paint the sky red, shimmering under the hot sun, making our own bed. I've tasted snowflakes born of ash, and I've yearned for the past. We masquerade as evolution's finest, toting our accomplishments proudly while slamming them into the twin masks of comedy and tragedy. Now we waltz through this golden city built on the bones of our brethren and hide under the pretense of civility. We're prim, proper, and primed for progress, waiting for bright places, forgetting those we've erased, quivering as we blister, blaze, and burn. Who will die and who will learn that under our aureate veneer rides the scarlet society whose future is unclear. Thank you.
This may come as a surprise, but I'm not Dave Congleton. Dave was just returning from a trip. He was a very diligent and thoughtful judge, and we were really happy to have him judge creative nonfiction and memoir. He doesn't need a lot of introduction to SLO Nightwriters, as he's been active with our group for many years. I'm sure a lot of you have listened to and maybe even appeared on his long-running Dave Congleton show every afternoon on KBEC. But you may not know, he's also an animal welfare advocate. He's the award-winning writer of 3 Cats, 2 Dogs, 1 Journey Through Multiple Pet Loss, a book I think I need to read. And he co-authored that with Charlotte Alexander. And another book is When Your Pet Outlives You, Protecting Animal Companions After You Die. He also wrote a screenplay, Scribble, which is scheduled to be directed by Ellie Canner. And most appropriately, he co-authored the talk radio guest book, How to Be a Perfect Radio Guest, Deborah Bales. Guess we all better read that before we go on his show. So the first prize in creative nonfiction memoirs to Colleen, I'm sorry, mispronounced, for The Unknowable.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's been a long time since I've read from my work. I do tell stories occasionally at Reboot in Morro Bay. If you haven't been, it's quite delightful, but you don't get to read. You have to have memorized your story. So I'll probably flub this up. Called The Unknowable. What are you so afraid of? Asked Doug for the 100th time since I'd known him. What do you think is going to happen? He was trying to convince me to attend the captain's dinner on our behemoth cruise ship, its name long forgotten. Maybe it was Nightmare of the Sea. We'd been friends since age 14, before he grew up to become, if not the most interesting man in the world, a leading candidate. Friends adored him for his easy way of making them laugh at themselves, for his quicksilver mind, his charisma. Doug could cite obscure facts about almost any topic from geography to literature. You might know there were 3 Bronte sisters, but did you know they also had a brother, Branwell? You didn't? And he'd say, in a way that made you want to rush out and buy their biography. He produced memorable New York City theater. After the plays, we'd gather at his elegant apartment to sample some exotic dishes. Never heard of red rice Gullah style? No? How frankly surprising, said with a tease of a smile, his green eyes flashing. Above all, he traveled everywhere. Often he flew himself, floating along in a tiny Cessna, singing romantic ballads to his corgi, Stella. He'd jet off to Paris for a dinner engagement and to buy his favorite almond-scented soaps. The next week, he'd fly to Rio for Carnival. Years later, he'd return to a distant place and remember every restaurant and secluded beach and how to get there. It became part of his DNA. And while he never met a country he didn't like, India claimed his soul. He went often, drawn to something he couldn't or maybe wouldn't explain. He called it the unknowable. In short, Doug was at home in the world. I, on the other hand, had been labeled the most boring person in the San Fernando Valley by Doug. He'd dropped by my apartment with a last-minute invitation to a party for Madonna at the Chateau Marmont or a private screening of the latest Robert Altman film. I usually preferred to stay home and read. Not for me, the glittering life. It was too much effort. Even so, we traveled like gypsies in our young 20s, hitchhiking through Europe. On a whim, we bought a beat-up Renault from an unshaven stranger in St. Mark's Square, $300, and we drove it over the Alps, the snowy Alps, a car with a double clutch. At 40, he was struck down by AIDS in a time when people still thought it could be contagious. Doug hid it for several years, but as he grew weaker and sarcomas appeared, there could be no more pretending. The mask was off. Exhausted from trying to survive, of the endless drugs and aborted hopes, he wanted to travel. A cruise to the British Virgin Islands was all he could manage, tame for a guy who had hiked the barren slopes of Tierra del Fuego alone. It fell to me to take him, and I didn't want to go. I had a 2-year-old daughter, his godchild, and I'd never spent a night away from her. What if she got sick? What if she fell out of her crib? What if? But I went. I had to. I was the best friend, and that was that. The cruise photographer snapped our picture walking up the gangplank, Doug handsome as a movie star, while I looked murderous for good reason. I knew what was coming, enduring the frowns of fleshy couples lounging by an over-chlorinated pool before they quickly turned away from his wasted body. Suffering through one dinner, the one dinner he bravely showed up for, stunning in his Savile coat and tie. He'd been charming and witty, but our dinner companions didn't want charm, not if it came with a gaunt face and a suspicious bruising. One woman kept nudging her husband, who stared into space. A retired army man commanded the table with stories he told in short, choppy sentences. He referenced times in military fashion. 0700 to rise, 0900 for breakfast. His wife glanced nervously at Doug and never said a word. What are you afraid of? He repeated. Afraid you might enjoy yourself? Afraid you might live a little? I saw the sadness in his face, so I slipped the cream-colored lace dress over my head, smoothed the folds, and presented myself. He studied me from the bed. How lovely, he said at last. A rare compliment. Go on, darling, and try not to embarrass me. Then he rolled over into the shadows. I stroked my cheeks with powdery blush to cover up recent tear tracks, but it can't be done. It never matches. At the captain's table, surrounded by 10 overdressed couples aglow with the fizzy confidence of health, I managed to smile. I managed to raise my glass to one and all and to laugh once more. In another universe, that is, on another ship in another place and time, not at this table, headed by a captain in crisp, immaculate whites. Water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. I hated every minute of the forced geniality where no one asked me if I were traveling alone, so I could say, no, I am traveling with my best friend who now lies in our stateroom, dying. I excused myself as soon as I could and hurried through raucous crowds to our room. The captain had gently saluted me as I scraped the chair away from the table. After so many years, he recognized the desperate. I tiptoed in, but Doug was awake. I can't breathe, he said. Could you find me some oxygen? So matter of fact, as if you were asking for an hors d'oeuvre. Some melon wrapped in prosciutto, perhaps? Or no, maybe oxygen. 10 minutes later, the ship's doctor was standing by his bed. This man should not be traveling, he shouted, his cheeks turning red. I don't have the resources on board for someone so ill. It felt less like the truth and more like fear. A man dying of AIDS on his ship? He muttered merde under his breath. There was no arguing with him. We would be taken off the ship the next morning and sent home on the first plane out. Vanished. But Doug refused to go. When the bursars came just after sunrise, he wouldn't budge. I begged him to get dressed. They began banging on the door as I scrambled to pack. Sir, you have to leave. Bang, bang. You must leave. I could hear people in the hallway. What's going on? Bang. Yes, yes, we're coming. Doug, please, please don't do this to me. Stop banging. We're coming. Slowly, so slowly, he started pulling his clothes on. Held his head high as we were marched through the ship's lobby, people staring, not knowing what happened, but certain it was something unpleasant, something that would ever happen to them, thank God. In the taxi, Doug gave the driver a wad of cash and directed him away from the airport to the most expensive resort on Barbados. Just be quiet, he ordered me, for once. An hour later, we were sitting on a balcony overlooking a soft turquoise sea while he pleaded with me to continue. He pulled out his credit card. I have so much money, he said. Let's spend it all. We would go from island to island and stay as long as we wanted, live large. He would get well. He would not die. We had to stay, but I couldn't. I was afraid, again, afraid I would end up on some remote shore, unable to help him, trapped with AIDS. This time, Doug was even more afraid. He wanted to outrun death, something I wouldn't understand until much later. I would not be persuaded. I had done enough. Doug looked at me for a long time. I was wrong about you, he said. You're the most boring person in the Western Hemisphere. I didn't care. I booked a charter flight, and the next day we flew to Florida, just ahead of a hurricane, the small plane bouncing and juddering all the way to Miami. Doug slept through it while I prayed and drank half a bottle of rum, thanks to a sympathetic flight attendant. When we got home, he told everyone he was fine, and if I hadn't been so hysterical, we'd still be traveling. A month later, he died. A sense of betrayal clouding 27 years intimacy to my grief. I never wore the lace dress again. 5 years after his death, I moved to Northern California where Doug was unknown. A new friend, Kira, a brunette with a wide smile, asked about the photo of Doug I keep in my office. I simply said he was a close friend who died too young, what I said to anyone who asked about him, which was everyone, given his remarkable looks. Kira was herself an unusual person. She would have amused Doug. He liked the quirky and authentic, and Kira was relentlessly herself. For one thing, she could not pass up a deal. She regularly picked through thrift stores and garage sales, and when she found something that she couldn't use, she'd buy it for a friend. Often she'd appear at my house with a bag of used clothes, each piece exactly my taste and a perfect fit. Only $1, she'd crow. In a city of devoted gardeners, Kira grew the sweetest lettuce and vegetables. It wasn't unusual to get an early morning knock at the door and have several bags of freshly washed veggies thrust at you. Gotta go, she'd say, and hop on her rickety bike before you had a chance to thank her. She was always in a mad rush. One evening, the doorbell rang very late, and I opened the door to Kira, dressed for a fancy county event, holding 40 balloons. These were going to be tossed, she explained, and handed them over. The next day, my 8-year-old woke up to a room filled with rainbow-colored balloons. On a May morning, a month I remember because Kira was hell-bent on making a maypole, she called me. Can I come by? I have something to tell you. It was 6 a.m. Give me 20 minutes for coffee, I mumbled, and exactly 20 minutes later, she pulled up on her bike. Kira got straight to the point. My husband went out last night, so I was alone, and it was very quiet. I had a fire going, and as I lay on the rug, your friend Doug appeared. Oh, really? Yes. He said he'd been trying to get through to you, but you're distracted and your channels are blocked. So he came to me. I didn't respond, and she went on. He said something about a boat, a huge boat, and a journey. He said that he was wrong. It wasn't your fault, and he's sorry. Kira studied me. Does that mean anything to you? I could only nod. These sorts of things didn't happen to me. Kira might have heard about the cruise from my husband, but He rarely spoke of it, and besides, she didn't seem the type to take advantage of someone's pain. I brought you some lettuce, Kira said suddenly, pulling some washed greens from her backpack as if our conversation was no more unusual than a typical lettuce handoff. Thank you, I said, for both the remain and the wild story. I was going to have to mull it over. Oh, and one more thing, Kira remembered as she strapped on her helmet and slung her leg over her bike. Doug said, tell her she was never boring.
Our last winner is Diane Parnell, who couldn't be here tonight. And her wonderful memoir, Dressing Up in Church Spaces, will either be read by Mary or myself. Would you like to read it? Not, I welcome you reading it.
Okay. All right, you guys can keep awake. Looks like a great story. I haven't read it yet, so. Dressing Up in Church Faces by Diane Parnell. We bathe 2 at a time on Saturday nights because Mom says there isn't enough time or water for 8 baths. Debbie is 9, and because she's the oldest, she's my mother's helper. She towels Teresa and Andrew off as Mom kneels at the tub, adding more Mr. Bubble and hot water while Thomas and I strip down for our turn. Once in, we splash at the end, making bubble beards and passing the bar of ivory soap back and forth. Our bathroom has a curtain instead of a door on it, and Mom appears every now and then, pulling the curtain back to remind us to wash behind our ears and keep the water in the tub. From the living room, the evening news ends and the Jackie Gleason show begins. I hear the band playing and know that the June Taylor dancers are performing, gliding across the stage in their glittery sequins and feathered hats. My favorite part is when the camera is on the ceiling pointing down at them, and they look like a giant pinwheel twinkling and twirling on the floor. My father loves the snow. He laughs when Jackie Gleason, the show, not the snow, sorry. My father loves the show. He laughs when Jackie Gleason clenches his jaws and fists and tells his wife that he's going to send her to the moon. I don't think it's so funny. The actor scares me with his loud voice and his eyes that bug out of his head. When he gets angry at Alice, I wonder that he really will hit her. I worry that he'll really hit her. I know he is only pretending, but my father wears that same face a lot. And when he does, there's no laughter from any of us. Mom comes back in when the bath water gets cold. I hold a washcloth against my eyes to protect them from the sting of the shampoo. Ouch, ouching as her fingertips scrub my scalp. Oh, stop it, she grumbles. That doesn't hurt. She calls to Billy and Michael that it's their turn, adding again more water and Mr. Bubble when Thomas and I climb out of the tub. In the kitchen, I stand on a chair as Mom rolls my hair up in small silver curlers that she keeps in a blue metal cookie tin. They pinch tight against my scalp, and when I lay my head on my pillow at night, it feels as though I have small stones tied all around my head. The entire family is up before the sun the next day, getting ready for a 6:30 morning mass. I asked Debbie to take my curlers out because she's gentler than Mom, unrolling them slowly so they don't tear my hair out. When she's done, I shake my head side to side, enjoying the tickle of the curls bouncing lightly against my face. My brothers all line up in the bathroom, waiting for Mom to slick their hair back into a Brill Cream swoosh as my father paces in the living room, brow furrowed, yelling that we're going to be late. Debbie hurries me and Teresa into our dresses while Susie rubs Vaseline on the toes of our scuffed black patent leather shoes, trying to make them shine. It's still dark out when our Chevy leaves the driveway. My father at the wheel, his mouth a tight, straight line across his face. There are 10 of us in the car, but we are so quiet that I can hear the crunch crunch of the gravel as we pull out onto the road and head into town. I watch my father's face change as he parades down the center aisle of the church to the front rows where we always sit. He's nodding and grinning at other parishioners we pass along the way, puffed up like a peacock in full feathered regalia. The 4 bigger kids shuffle into the very front pews. Mom slides in behind them with Andrew on her lap, and me, Thomas, and Teresa squished between her and my father. Michael fidgets all during Mass, wrapping his hand around the bench in front of him, rubbing it back and forth until the friction and his sweat make it start to squeak. He looks at Billy out of the corner of his glasses to see if he hears it, and they smirk at one another, both trying not to laugh. It is funny. It sounds just like a fart, and I stifle my own giggle. Michael continues until he feels a poke in his back and turns to a stern look from my father. I can't blame my brother for fidgeting. Church does get pretty boring with Father Biskey up there on the pulpit with his wet, saggy eyes droning on and on about how we are all sinners and how God will throw us into the fires of hell if we don't obey him. Even Andrew gets restless, wriggling around in his mom's arms until she sticks her pinky in his mouth to quiet him. At the end of the Mass, the priest says, "Go forth and bear fruit." My father sits up straighter, and I wonder why the 2 old ladies across the aisle are staring at my family and whispering. The altar boys open the tall wooden doors at the back of the church, and Father Biskey stands on the steps outside, greeting parishioners as we filter out. He shakes my father's hand as we pass, saying something about the blessing of all these gifts from God. My father is once again a peacock, wearing that face with the grin that I never see at home. We pile into the car, Debbie between my parents in the front with Teresa on her lap. Thomas climbs up to stretch out on the window shelf while the rest of us nudge each other for room on the crowded back seat. My father wheels the Chevy out of the parking lot, and once we make the bend in the road and the church is out of sight, he pulls slowly over to the side. Off slips the church face, and with a swift twist in his seat, he punches Michael right in the chest, causing my brother's glasses to fly off his face and land in my lap. And then there is silence, thick and sudden, and anxiety begins to tap, tap along my ribs. I never want to hear you making that noise in church again. Have you got that? My father is shouting out of his real face now as the cords on his neck strain against his tie. Michael whimpers a yes, holding his hands to his chest. And yes, and you should know better than to encourage him. My father shakes his fist at Billy, then grabs the glasses from my lap and throws them at Michael. Now put these back on your face, and I don't want to hear a peep until we get home. He spins back around and pulls back onto the road, and we ride home in silence. Not a word from my mother, frozen in her seat, eyes fixed on the windshield in front of her. Later, I search out Debbie. I want to ask my big sister why my father's home face is so different from his church face. I want to ask her about what happened in the car and why Mom never says or does anything. I want to know if she's as scared as I am. But when I finally get the chance to talk to her, the words cannot find their way out of my head and onto my tongue. The secret about what happens here on our isolated farm
has locked itself inside of me, just like it has for the rest of them. Not to be spoken, not to be discussed, even when it is right out in the open. Instead, I ask her what Father Binky means when he says bear fruit. Debbie rolls her eyes. Oh, that, she tisks. He means have more babies.
Again, thanks for coming. We've had a great audience and some wonderful reading. So let's chat in the back, have some refreshments, and look at the books our authors have brought to share with us. Bye. So.